some cool new stuff in the mass market, and that reputation depends on us having some interesting new ideas about how to apply new technologies in the transactional space. And just like you, we don't get enough new ideas just from, and because I don't want to say bad things about conferences with Finovate being around or whatever, but it's like, you just go sit and you watch someone on stage presenting, Oracle Financial 16.9 or something, but you don't really learn very much. And you're in an audience of really smart people who all know a lot about all of these issues. And I had this thing, you learn more from each other than you do from... So the idea is not for me to stand up here and tell you stuff like it was school or something, but for me to sort of get the process going so that once you get around the tables a bit later on, everybody is learning from everybody else. Everybody has something to say. And like I said, when we go around the tables, it isn't school, so if you get involved in the discussion and you feel that you're not learning anything from it, or worse still, you're not contributing anything to it, which is the greatest sin, just pick up and go to another table. It's like no one's, you know what I mean, you're grown-ups. So the idea is to set a whole set of conversations going throughout the day so that we all walk away having learned some new stuff from different people. I mean, this is what it's all about. But of course, the key theme to the whole thing is about innovation and technology. And I can't resist saying, I mean, I know I can see at least one person I bored with this story before, but I said, there's this guy who has worked for a bank for like a really long time. I mean, I'm sort of glancing at people here, which this wouldn't apply to. I'm talking about like an old guy who's worked for this bank for a really long time. And the guy gets to retire. So in bank tradition, they have like a little party, and they give him a clock or something. I can't remember what it was exactly. Some little thing. It's not important to the story. You don't need to write this bit down, because it's not important to the story. Whether it's a clock or something is. So, and so he gets on stage, and the CEO of the bank comes, because it's a special occasion, the guy's been there for so long, and the CEO prepares some dreary homily to the guy, which he comes through. And then he says to the guy on the stage, he goes, "Oh, you must have seen some incredible changes in your 50 years at the bank." He said, "What technology made the biggest difference to your job at the bank?" And the guy says, "Air conditioning." Which, and it's funny and everybody laughs and so on. But he was right. If you look at Robert Gordon's magisterial history of post-war American productivity, the point is, especially if you look at the financial services sector, you can see air conditioning arrive in the statistics. You can actually see when air conditioning began to be deployed into mass markets, and you can see the rise in productivity that went with it. Utterly transformational. You can actually see it in the statistics. Like, it's funny that the guy, but he was right. And if you look at those same statistics and you comb through them, trying to find the invention of computers, nothing. Remember, it was, I was going to say it's Reich, it wasn't Reich, but it was the Clintons. He said, we see computers everywhere except in the productivity statistics. And that's kind of true. And if you look at financial sector productivity, I mean, I won't say it's poor, but it's flat, right? So we have all this amazing new stuff, but we don't really use it to do anything amazing or new, right? So by and large, what we've done is capture existing inefficient analog processes and computerize them, I might say, in extremely inefficient ways. I mean, nobody who who read that thing in the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago about the desperate search for COBOL programmers? They've set up a school in the Philippines to try and teach people COBOL. This is like the benchmark of... So Anthony Jenkins, when he was the CEO of Barclays, he said, "We've been digitizing the bank we haven't made it digital. And he got fired, not for saying that, I don't think, but he did get fired shortly after. But the point is, he was right. So this, and I think without looking at people in particular, I mean, one or two of us have been around for a little while. But you see the point I'm making, which is, all this amazing new technology, but we haven't actually changed that much. So that, when I was thinking about today, that led me to start thinking, well, okay, it's easy, that's an easy thing to say, right? So we've digitized things, we haven't made them digital. But what would it mean to actually make things digital? I mean, and I'll pick the two things that are at the core of the financial services stuff, which are digital money and digital identity. So I could argue that, for example, I mean, I like Apple Pay. It's fantastic. I like it as much as everybody else. See, now that's quite a funny joke if you're paying attention to any of the statistics about the take-up of tokenized payment applications in the US compared to the... Okay, it's the wrong crowd for that sort of thing. Statistics, okay. But that's digitized. What all you've done is you've taken the sort of 1990s chip card product based on a 1980s debit product, which was based on a 1970s magstripe product, using a 1960s PAN, using a 1950s card format, and put it in an iPhone. I mean, it's no wonder people aren't sort of running down the street with excitement waving these things around. It's almost completely uninteresting. It's not completely uninteresting, but useful, right? I use it, but it's almost completely uninteresting. So what would it mean to have digital money rather than digitized money? Does that mean Bitcoin, for example? I mean, I don't know the answer. I'm asking the question because I'm genuinely curious. What would it mean to have something that's digital instead of digitized? I mean, I applied this example the other day where a complex thing we were involved to do with driving licenses, and somebody, is it Utah or Wisconsin, or I can't remember, they were talking about having a digital driving license. They didn't mean a digital driving license, of course, they meant a digitized driving license, because they're just putting a copy of your driving license on your phone, which is almost as uninteresting as Apple Pay. I mean, it's, it's close. But I mean, what would you do with that you don't do with an ordinary... I mean, like the whole point of not having... Like, what's wrong with having a digitized driving license? Well, what's wrong is it carries everything that's wrong with the current system with it, just in a more easily accessible format, right? So, if you had, just to pick an extremely trivial example, let's say I'm trying to prove... Now, see, I want to say, like, try and prove I'm over 18, but that doesn't really work. You know what I mean? It doesn't have the dramatic narrative impact that I'm looking for with this kind of thing. And so I'm trying to think of a more exciting example.
Truck driving.
Truck driving, that's a good example. So let's try, I'm trying to prove that I'm a truck driver, right? I don't know why, because women like truck drivers, is that the thing? I don't know, I don't have your experience in this.
Well, you need a specialized license.
In that case, I'll pretend to be an airline pilot. Okay. So if I show Paddy my pilot license, that's because I wouldn't like hold it up like this. I just like put it on the table so I know you can see it. It's like, how would you know that was real? What's the point? That's as stupid as when you go into a bank, they ask you to show your passport to open an account. The whole thing's completely ridiculous. They have no conceivable way of knowing whether it's real or not, unless the branches of banks here have suddenly started hiring these anti-terrorist geniuses that can spot fake passports from all around the world in a matter of seconds. They haven't, by the way. There's a thing in the UK at the moment about... we have a very big problem with instant payments fraud, because we have instant payments. You can dream about this. You could one day... think of it... Think of it like a sort of Star Trek kind of thing. Like, it could happen here one day. But we already have instant payments. And so we have incredible fraud with this, right? Because what happens is people get sent... I mean, you wouldn't fall for this, right? But let's say you get an email from your landscape gardener, for example, /husband, in this account. You get an email that says, please send the money to this account. Oh, by the way, I changed my account. So don't send it to the branch in Connecticut anymore. Send it to the branch in Vladivostok, because that's my new account. And it's really, because it's just a routing code and an account number. So people just type it in, send the money to Vladivostok, right? And when the gardener calls up and says, I didn't get the money, they complain to the bank. And the bank says, quite reasonably, well, what do you expect us to do? You told us to send the money there. Why is it our fault that you sent the money to completely the wrong? And what's more, we have these rigorous two-factor authentication mechanisms in place, right? And you did all of them. What the bank is supposed to step in, like, are you sure? That'd be kind of annoying, right? And besides, because of the rigorous and very well enforced and extremely effective KYC, AML, CTF, PEP procedures, it's kind of a bad crime, right? Because if you send the money to the wrong account, then it's easy for the police to go around and arrest the people, right? Because, so this is why this never happens. It happens all the time.
I sent somebody something with MoneyGram to an M-Pesa account a couple of weeks ago, and I get this message. It says, are you sending money to the IRS or another government agency? Are you buying a car, a puppy? Are you renting an apartment? Are you sending money to claim a lottery or a prize or a guaranteed credit card or a loan? Are you responding to the internet offer letter or phone call saying that you're getting a job or mystery shopping? If so, stop the transaction right now.
A puppy? This is the big fraud here? Is puppies?
I don't know.
We should have to worry about puppies.
IRS scam, but I haven't heard about the puppies.
Don't you want to know now?
That's like
I don't know. What is the puppy?
And it says like may cause suicidal tendency.
Yes.
Like that's how you know it's.
Was that Burma money here or MoneyGram?
MoneyGram.
MoneyGram say that now?
People myself.
Yeah. Anyway, it's apropos.
I never heard of puppy fraud before. That's
Isn't that cool?
fantastic.
Puppies have hardware security now. So
It's,
the breeder.
it's clearly an effective mechanism for getting money out of debt, but puppies. So.
That's big.
NFC puppies are a thing. It's like the horses were the first form of NFC chips. Right? They're doing dogs all the time.
The horses? What do you mean?
Right, but you can
Horse
check your
racing.
account.
NFC chips they put in the back of
Right. Yeah. No, I remember that. Yeah, we tried to. It's irrelevant to the thing, but we tried to. We were having a conference in the UK, and I wanted those guys to inject me with one of those on stage because I thought this would be funny and it would be interesting for people, and they absolutely would not do it.
Oh, you go to that, they'll do it for you.
Yeah, I should have just paid because the FDA hadn't approved them for people. I'm like, come on, like these horses are worth a lot of money. They wouldn't be putting them in the horses if they were. Just put one in my arm. I don't care. And they wouldn't do it with the thing. And I said, I'll sign the insurance waivers and whatever. They absolutely wouldn't do it. Remember this? And then I read they were doing it in Barcelona, where they have famously strict health and safety regulations. Right?
It'd be good for your Twitter account.
No, they were putting it. They were doing it at a nightclub. Yeah, it was the Baja Beach nightclub in Barcelona. So if you had the loyalty card for the, I'm not making this up. This is completely true. If you had the loyalty card for the nightclub, you could choose to have the loyalty card either as a card, which when you went in they would like stamp it and so on, or you could have it as a chip in your arm. And a lot of people chose to have the chip inserted in their arm. And then the way it would work is you go to the nightclub and then you say, well, I don't know, I'm imagining, I've only seen them in movies, but you would say something like, I'd like a gin and tonic, please, my good man, or something like that. And the chap comes around with the drink, and they have a little scanner. It beep, just scans your arm, and it all goes onto your bill, and then you get the stuff added up. And the people... What?
What about the club closing?
Well, it's still there as far as I know. But the point is, it was very different. No, I can make a highly gendered point about it because I was so curious about it. It was very popular with women because no
They want to
pockets.
carry their wallet.
No pockets, right? So you just get the chip instead, right? I told this to Amex. Were they listening? No. I said, there's a whole demographic out there of people with no pockets for Amex cards in. And then you would never leave home without it. That's a great thing. See, I know marketing. They don't. They don't know what they're doing.
Have you seen the Chinese fingernails with the NFC chips on them?
No,
they have
fingernails.
They have an LED light in them, so when you hold them into the NFC field of your phone, they light up. And at the same time, there's an NFC chip in there that actually allows the RFID signal back and forth.
I already want one of those.
So is it just attached by polish? Like you
Yes,
can get
it's just polished into the nails, and it fits under the nail coating.
I could.
So
I
we're
know.
trying to have dialogue.
We could make one of those. I know how to make those because when we
You can
worked
buy
on
Alibaba for 15 cents a piece.
no, but we'd want one. So when we worked on the Transport for London, the open loop migration in London, they had the transit cards in London called Oyster cards, and people discovered when these were first put out. People discovered. I mean, how you discovered this, I don't know. It's clearly a nightclub accident that led to this. But people discovered that the plastic that the cards were made from would dissolve in nail polish remover, in acetone. So you take a dish, you remember this, we were messing around with this? So you take a dish, you fill it with the nail polish remover, you put the card in, leave it overnight, and in the morning the card's dissolved, and you're left with the chip and the antenna. And then people would take the chip and the antenna and do fun things with them, right? The guy had the Harry Potter wand with the... So there's a guy, he had this Harry Potter wand, and he super glued it to the end of the Harry Potter wand. And then he would go down to the subway with his wand, and go, and the gate would open, and baffled tourists would stand around. This is the home of Harry Potter. Of course you'd be able to open with wands. Where do we get one of these? So it was. That's how they should do it. That was my favourite. Was a guy super glued one to the back of a £5 note. And so he would go down to the subway with his money and touch the gate with his money, and the gate would open. And people were just like astonished at this sort of thing. Right? I mean, people can be very inventive with that sort of stuff. Which, in any case, has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. So stop distracting me with these interesting stories about clever technology. So, what was I talking about? Oh, digitised, right. So what would a digitised driving licence do? Sorry, the other way around. So what would a digital driving licence do that a digitised driving licence doesn't? Just to pick one example. Well, it seems to me that a digital thing, as opposed to a digitised thing, a digital thing is smart. A digital thing would be intelligent, right? A driving licence isn't intelligent. So if you digitise it, you're just making something that's not intelligent, but in a phone. Whereas if you start from scratch and construct something digital, then it would be smart. So to take that simple example, one thing that a smart driving licence should be able to do is talk to other smart driving licences, right? So if you showed me your driving licence, my driving licence would be able to tell me whether it's real or not. That would be a really simple example of the difference between digitised and digital. You see what I'm driving at, right? So if we're trying to imagine digital services, in particular digital financial services, we try to imagine services that are constructed from these smart components. And we try to imagine services which are not digital mimetic echoes of these non-productive analog solutions. And I can say non-productive because I just told you, I know the figures, right? So, therefore, if we're being optimistic, we would say, well, okay, as we make this transition to digital, we're on the verge of an actual productivity transformation in financial services, which we haven't had before. There has been no productivity. The figures are there, you can see it, there has been no transformation. But if we're being optimistic, we're on the edge of a transformation. But I just want to flag up one point, which you're going to see come back again and again through the day, which, and I kind of alluded to it by talking about the sort of fraud there, which is we make this transition into digital, we are wholly unprepared for the ramifications of that transition. So I want that transition because I want to transform the productivity in financial services, but I recognise we're unprepared for it. So Marshall McLuhan said, he was this like really famous writer that wrote about sorry, I realised I've got to be more inclusive with the audience. Okay. There are people here that have read books, I'm guessing? No?
On the phones.
Okay. Man, I made a bad democratic choice. The medium is the message, that's right. So McLuhan, who was Canadian, not the most interesting thing about him, but true. McLuhan was the guy who invented media studies. He's the guy that You only know him from the movie, right? Play It Again, Sam.
Yeah, I read the pilot.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Testimony that I'm right about this. So it was funny in the movie, though, wasn't it? With Woody Allen, when he's like in the line arguing about McClure. You remember this? He's in the movie line, and there's the guy in front making this kind of pretentious claims about McClure, and Woody Allen's like, and he turns around and he's got Marshall McLuhan standing behind him. How you got to be a professor of anything, I don't know. So anyway, McLuhan said that, and remember, he was writing this in the 1960s. He was trying to think. This is before the internet and laser beams and transistors and things. And he was trying to think, well, not transistors, that was 1948, but there's a rhetorical oversight. Don't write it down. So he said, in the always-on, interconnected world of the future, and remember, he was thinking about this, it didn't exist. He was trying to imagine the consequences. He said, in the always-on, interconnected world of the future, there will be new ways of being evil. New ways of being evil that we haven't thought of yet. Right? So, things like fraud and whatever, those are the old ways of being evil, and we have to deal with those. But if we digitize everything, if we connect everything, there are going to be new ways of being evil. And we just see the edge of this now, right? With, fake news and election tampering and all this kind of thing. So one of the things that's going to pervade the discussions today is, I hope, some intelligent and creative thought, so that we don't just run gambling through these new fields of exciting digitized everything, but we think in practical terms. How is it actually going to work, right? And so, and I don't know what technologies you're going to write down. I don't know what you're going to write down on the post-it notes about what you want to talk about. But I would imagine one of the topics that will come up will be things like Bitcoin and blockchains and so on. So I've invited Leanne Kemp, who's absolutely, don't tell her this, but one of my favourite people in the entire world, who is the CEO and founder of Everledger, which is a blockchain company which tracks diamonds on the blockchain to try to prevent blood diamonds and things like that. And she's turned that into a very successful company. And there's a link because I know her because she was in the Barclays Accelerator in the UK, and she's one of their success stories, and you're going to enjoy this. We have Cameron, who's going to be talking about human trafficking and how we might use some of these technologies to make a big difference in, a rather serious play, which also relates to identity and stuff like that. We've got Mike Judas coming along towards the end of the day to get us up to speed on what's actually happening in the blockchain and crypto space, because I find this a little confusing. Who's got Bitcoin here? Anybody got Bitcoin here? You do? Oh, it's still a thing. I thought it was like. I thought it was. Well, look. I have a certain amount of skepticism about, although as you'll see from the stuff I've written, I'm very convinced that tokens are the basis of the next revolution, even though my skepticism about cryptocurrency remains. So Mike Duda's just founded The Block, so he's going to come along this afternoon and talk about that. And we couldn't think of anybody else for the morning. So I was kind of thinking, who's got a new book they want to promote? Who's got a great new book?
With a great title.
And so my old friend Brett King very kindly agreed to come along and be our first fireside chat for the day. So Brett, do you want to come up and take a seat? Oh yes. So while we're talking, so you'll see the post-it notes scattered around. So while we're talking, if you want to start making note, like what are the subjects you'd like to see addressed today? What do you want to talk about today? What would you like to learn about? Just anything you want. Just put it down on the notes, and in the coffee break, we'll group them into the discussion table. So please, just put anything on the notes. I don't mean literally anything, because obviously I mean something that's vaguely related to a topic we might discuss around the table later on. So just please start making the notes. We'll collect them up, and then in the coffee break we'll organise the So Brett, thanks very much for coming. I really appreciate it. I know you're kind of busy, so
It's great.
I'll come back to the book in a minute because
This is actually your copy, I signed.
that's good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'll come back to the book in a minute, but I just wanted to, because we're thinking about kind of innovation here and stuff that's going on, I just wanted to kind of get an update from you where you are with Movement, because you came here a couple of years ago and you talked about, these, getting the first deals like with ANZ and things like that. Things have moved on a lot since then. So can you just give people a snapshot of where Movement came from and where it is now? Because it's a great innovation story.
Yeah, so Movement started as one of the first challenger banks globally. We were technically the third mobile challenger bank in the world, but the first with a mobile first strategy. That is, we were the first to offer account opening through a mobile app, right, in the world. So, but around the time of Fedor and Simple, they preceded us by about 6-8 months. But we launched here in the US. The original name was Move and Bank. We had trouble launching under that name because we didn't have a charter. We got it around the federal authorities here and got a way to launch it, but the state regulator wouldn't allow it. So thank you, US, for your regulatory structure. So we changed to Movin', dropped the bank. Then in 2014, we launched in end of 2012 in beta, came out of beta, I guess, February 2014. At the end of 2014, had a bunch of banks coming forward saying to us, we really like what you guys have done. Would you license us your tech? Which, when you're in a startup and you don't have any revenue, that sort of thing is pretty encouraging. But it then caused us to pivot to have sort of two businesses, the direct-to-consumer business and the enterprise business. The direct-to-consumer business is plotted along. We're about to sort of relaunch that. Hi Dave, just saw you back there. With a sort of big bang, we've looked at acquiring a banking license of our own here in the US and a few other strategies for doing that. But
is that one of these new OCC licenses?
No, we'd be looking at a proper charter.
Conventional?
Yeah, conventional charter. The OCC charter wouldn't give us a huge benefit of what we've already got today. But the challenge of the enterprise business, rather, is growing. Now we're in 7 different geographies. We have about 5 million users broadly on the platform. TD is our largest customer to date, with about 1.7 million users on TD MySpend, which is Move and White Label. For TD, this has been a very successful project. We can compare mobile users of TD Bank's current app structure, those that don't use MySpend versus those that do, and those that do use the Move and tech. On month save about 4 to 8% versus the cohort that doesn't. The retention rate the churn rate of customers in the MySpend cohort has dropped to 0. And
zero?
Yeah, and from 3.2% is their average churn in their existing rate, and they're saying it's effectively 0. And that increased awareness and the savings that they're getting is encouraging people to consolidate card balances proactively rather than through a marketing strategy. So TD is pretty happy with that. We launched with BCA in Indonesia, Yandex Money in Russia, Westpac in Australia, New Zealand, a few others in Latin America and so forth. So really is quite an interesting global business that we've built. Things are going really well. We did a joint venture and a Series C with SBI, SoftBank Investments, or SBI Holdings now. They're a listed company out of Japan earlier this year, so we're well funded as well.
So just to go back to the consumer business for a second, so ultimately this begins to throw up one of the themes which I think will come up during the day, which is the difference between the US and other places. So in Europe, of course, you wouldn't need to get a banking license because under the open banking regulations, you'd be able to access the consumer bank accounts anyway. In the US, that doesn't seem close, despite stuff that was going around yesterday about Dodd-Frank and so on. So do you see this sort of splitting into two different kinds of businesses? Because I'm quite curious about whether open banking is really going to make a difference to businesses like yours. Superficially, it seems it will.
Well, key to our success is our real-time behavioural engagement. So the ability to help people understand, be aware of how they're spending their money and modify that behaviour as a result of feedback that they get through the app.
Yeah.
That real-time component can only happen through either real-time open banking architecture or through access to every payment processor that the customer uses, right? So if you don't have open banking, then you're relying on things like aggregation services where the data is delayed and you can't get a real-time architecture, which is why Movin launched with our own debit card in addition to aggregation rather than just sitting on top of aggregated data, because the real-time component is essential.
And so does that mean that in places where they have open banking, the open banking can't deliver the kind of service that you need anyway?
Well, it depends on, if you've got API level access to the different banks, you can pull the data immediately.
Right.
Theoretically, yeah, but are you pulling it all the time? Well, no, you're probably doing 3-4 times a day or something like that. Same way the aggregators are. So that's the challenge, right?
And so in the US, what's the process? How long is it going to take to actually get one of these licenses and launched, do you think?
So you...
I'm not encouraging you to make forward-looking
No. So, we've been through the process. We've made bids on a number of banks, and for various reasons we haven't got there yet. The process is
so you're just going to buy a bank instead of
we
cheap
looked at
and paying the lawyers?
There is no rapid path to a national Fed charter in the United States. You're looking at a 2-year process from scratch. For acquisition of an existing bank, you can reduce that to sort of 6 to 9 months.
Okay.
Right? And so that's the fastest way about it. The only problem you get, of course, is if you acquire an existing bank, you also acquire the existing legal structure in the United States, which requires you to still have a branch.
Right.
Which, every
But you
time
can
I
have
think
like a
about
ceremonial branch.
that, every time I think about that, I die a little bit inside.
But you can have the branch anywhere in the US, right?
Yeah, and so we would have
you could have like a branch in Hawaii. Or
so essentially, our pitch to the banks that we've been working with is saying, you guys keep your branch open, you run it with the existing 6 staff you've got or whatever, and as long as you run that and it doesn't need money, then we'll let you keep doing that, and we'll do all the other stuff.
So if anyone's got a spare bank they're not using, preferably one with just one branch.
But the FDIC and the Feds have made very clear they would prefer us to acquire an existing bank than go through a new charter process.
So basically, from an idea that you had and a few people you got together in a room in New York, you now have this great business, which I love hearing about because I like hearing stories of genuine entrepreneurialism, especially in financial services. But you also have a business that's actually changing things a little bit, because, kind of alluding to what I was talking about at the beginning, the way people use those MySpends and things like that, you're actually changing their behaviour. You're actually influencing the way people use financial services.
So this comes back to my thesis that if you think about where banking is going, and I plotted on a graph in the book, but if you think about every industry right now is going through this massive shift towards digital distribution wherever possible. So, so I'll try and give you guys an XY axis, right? So we're moving from physical distribution to digital distribution. Every industry. Just ask JCPenney's here in the United States, right? And then in banking, what you've got is on the experiential side, you go from very high friction engagement to low friction, low latency engagement powered by tech. So if you plot that on a graph, we're going like this, right? And it's inevitable that we'll end up in an environment where banking is embedded in your life, day to day, low latency, zero friction engagement wherever possible. So if you were designing a bank account, coming back to your argument earlier on, if you're designing a bank account in this ecosystem or in this context, then you don't start with a branch-based model of banking and retrofit it. right, you end up with something that looks a lot more like Alipay in China or Tencent WeChat or M-Pesa, which is sort of a first principles rethink of a value store on a phone in a very low financial inclusion environment. Right? And in that, if you look at differentiation, the utility of the bank account is in the differentiator. Right? So the fact that it enables you to store money safely. What differentiates a bank account is its utility in the real world and the intelligence behind that bank account, whether that bank account can make your financial life better. And so we think that advice as a platform is ultimately the differentiator of one bank account to another in the future. We're trying to essentially build a platform for that. And so in that light, as many people as possible want to get to use our core technology around the day-to-day behaviour of a bank account.
That throws up two questions then. I should say, by the way, Brett, you didn't know what I was going to ask you, so if you're wondering why he seems confused by my questions.
I'm just perennially confused.
But then that brings two things to mind. So first of all, if you look at the sort of boring fundamentals, and this is a sweeping generalisation, broadly speaking, the return in banking, return on equity on the distribution side is much higher than return on equity on the manufacturing side.
Right.
So if people like you capture the disproportionate returns on the distribution side, that means the manufacturing side tends towards a high volume, low margin, kind of more sort of factory model. I'm sure other people have said this to you.
Yes.
So does that condemn people like Cap 1 to be these factories? I'm just picking or do the conventional banks have an opportunity to move into that distribution space? Or is their choice really going to be limited?
So there's sort of really three options here, right? One is you convert your house into a tech company. You become a technology-based bank. So you essentially try to rebuild your distribution layer in the same way challenger banks have built it.
Right.
I'll be clear, some challenger banks won't make it either, right? But there'll be a lot of big retail banks that won't make it, right? Because they're just being too slow on the digital turnaround. The second strategy is you say, well, we don't want to bet the farm, we're too big a bank to do that, so let's spin off and create our own digital bank as a challenger. So Chase has Fin, Wells Fargo has Greenhouse, HSBC has this iceberg project. You know why they call it iceberg? Because they say it's going to sink the challengers. I think it's probably the other way around, but anyway. So that's a strategy. And then the third way is you say, we've lost the distribution play. We've got a declining legacy of customers who are still using the branch. They're slowly declining. We're prepared to live off that. In the meantime, let's become a wholesale manufacturer of stuff.
Right.
We can
Which I think for some of them might be a bad choice, actually. Although it does require a step change in operational efficiency that requires some investment. It's not an easy step to make.
What about the other kind of bank that is like fintech-friendly banks like WebBank and Cross River? How do they fit in?
Well, I think they're bet it all on being a manufacturer essentially, right, or a gateway for that. But
this is like Starling, and you can by focusing on providing the great APIs. That's an example of that strategy. But in order to sit behind those APIs, you have to have a vastly more operationally efficient infrastructure than a lot of the conventional banks do.
If you're going to be successful at that, you really have to be very, very good at providing that suite of services that your partner distribution players would use.
And I don't have the US figures in my head, but in the UK, despite the challenges like Starling and Monzo have signed up a lot of customers, if you look at the sort of transactions and the use and all that, it's absolutely, I think, the top 10 most used mobile apps are all the incumbent banks. Most of the transactions still go. I mean, people get these additional accounts, but there's no evidence that there's a big transition in place. What might happen instead is, I think you're right about distribution stuff, is there are other people waiting to step into that distribution game, and they're not nice people. It's not banks.
This
It's
is
Facebook and Google and people like that.
This is where the behavioural element is critical. So in both the markets where we have mature, outside of the US, right, where we have a mature partnership. So in Canada with TD and New Zealand with Westpac, our apps are the #1 daily used apps in banking. Right? Now that's because our apps are not designed to be banking apps.
Right.
They're designed to be money, day-to-day money behaviour
Right,
apps,
right.
right? And so that's why we are the #1 apps in those stores. So I don't know if that's a great measure, but it is talk.
No, it's
does
a
talk to-
proxy for.
So you have to say then, in this environment where you have the Monzo and the Starlings and the Movens and Simples coming in and competing, then what are you competing for? Are you competing for a bank account, or are you competing for engagement, day-to-day engagement usage? And I think that if you forget that you have to be the primary value store, then it's a different strategy.
But that leads me on to the other question I was going to ask, which was in your last book, Augmented, still available, I think, in the
Absolutely. Wherever good books are sold.
But one of the reasons why that book was interesting, I mean, there were many reasons why the book was interesting, but one of the reasons why that book was interesting was because of what you were saying about the arrival of AI and machine learning and this sort of decision making. And I think what's changed over the last couple of years is because we can all see this entering the business now. Although if you look at the statistics for the spending, most of the AI spending is actually machine learning spending, isn't it? If you look at the actual where the money's going. And I can't remember the exact, but I think for 80-90% of that spend goes into anti-fraud stuff at the moment. But you can see we're on the cusp of a big change in that kind of thing. But I think what's changed over the last couple of years thinking about that stuff is I was reading that and thinking about, well, it would be cool if my bank had all this stuff to help me out. And I was thinking about the example of pensions in particular, because you and I are both involved with the pensions thing in Australia. And of course, I regard myself as a smart person, as you do too, I'm sure. And we have a very great pensions advisor, Keith. He's been our pension advisor for years, right? He's a great guy in Newgore. And when he comes in to do our pensions review, he might as well be talking Mandarin Chinese. And I'm a clever person, and I have literally no idea what he's talking about. It's like inverse capital taper flip means we've got to do, I have no idea. And that led me to think, isn't the transformation that's coming that I will have an AI? It isn't that the bank's going to have an AI. It's that I'm going to have an AI. I don't want to do that stuff. That's exactly the stuff I'm far too irresponsible to plan my own pension or. That's exactly the sort of thing computers should be doing for me. But then you take us into a world where it's your bot selling financial services to my bot. Like, it couldn't be more unlike the financial services world we have now.
Right.
I can assure you, my bot is not going to care less about your stupid TV commercials or.
Which is why the fundamental dynamic of distribution is changing. And this is where, like Bank 3.0, which was a predecessor to this book, I wrote in 2012. And so that's like almost 7 years betwen drinks, right? And as we say in Australia. But
so that's 49 dog years.
Correct.
And 1 bank year.
Yeah. But in that paradigm, what I realised the big shift is that when you move to AI, when you move to advice as a platform where your money movement and your money management is framed within an AI, everything that we've learned over the last 700 years about community-based distribution of bank products and services is effectively absolutely useless, right? Because none of the products that we sell in a branch today, ultimately over the next 30 years will survive. Take an example, plastic credit cards with a 16-digit PAN, right? With airline mile reward programs for increased spending. That model will absolutely not survive the transition to digital. The way we'll access credit will be contextual. You'll walk into a grocery store. If you don't have enough cash to pay for your groceries today, rather than waiting to the checkout, having your debit card declined and then going to have to fish for an alternate payment method, as you walk in the grocery store, a solution will be presented to you. Whether it's through your AI on the phone, whether it's through augmented reality smart glasses, the plastic credit card, the credit card department, the rewards program we currently have, none of that will transition to that environment. And so if you take that as an analogy for what's happening, if you think about the bank org chart, you think about the legacy systems that reinforce the credit cards, all of that architecture you've built is not going to help you in this future environment.
Well, thank you for that sort of cheery, because a lot of people here work for banks. Listen, Brett, I'm sorry we ran out of time to talk about the book. It is very good. It's called Bank 4.0. It's available from all good booksellers, and I dare say some of the bad ones as well. So please go straight back to your Amazon. Brett, thank you very much.
Technically doesn't come out in the US till November 15th. But,
We'll get the
yeah, it's out everywhere else.
So, and you're going to stick around and...
I'll stick around for a little
That's fantastic.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Brett.
Thank
Really
you.
And I say again, we were completely honest. Brett didn't know what I was going to ask him. I really prefer hearing people's honest opinions from their own expertise rather than some dreary PR script that was handed to them on the way in. So now, we're going to take a coffee break in a second, so please carry on writing on the post-it notes topics that you want to discuss, things you want to learn about, things that you think you can teach other people, things that you think will be valuable, that will give you new ideas. Write them all on the post-it notes. We'll come collect up the post-it notes. Go relax and have a cup of coffee, meet some new people, mingle, network. People still do that. And then what we will do is in a few minutes we'll organise the first set of discussion groups. So have some coffee and relax and hand over your post-it notes.
I like to see you